Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here on YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 136, and you can pretty much tell already from what you're looking at what the focus for this episode is on. Diary of a Madman, the second studio album from Ozzy Osbourne, and the day that I am recording this right now is on the day that it was originally released back in 1981. And so since this has already been released on Monday, which would just be which again is basically the day after I'm recording this, it has already reached its 40th anniversary. So 40 years for pretty much again one of the more pivotal albums in Ozzy's career. It also helped solidify his solo career. It helped solidify even or just cement Randy Rhoads in history, or even at times legacy, whether it be for good or bad. And we all know what that ends up leading to anyways, what the whole bad part about it, or this, I guess I can say maybe more sad part, but you pretty much know anyways. It's self-explanatory. So, what do I really begin with this? With at least basically me talking about Diary of a Madman. Where do I begin the overall the conversation, whatnot? Where do I begin? Be honest, I don't know if I really need to really go into too much detail on the history leading up to Diary of a Madman, since all of you are probably just more familiar as I am with at least the history leading up to this particular album and the history that would come after this album. So I don't have to really talk too much in length or even in detail about this album. So the only thing you need to know, or at least know about, is my relationship basically with this album. Where do I really fit in? How since I don't want to really come off like somebody who basically just looks at classic albums like some random YouTube reviewer who just goes on, oh yeah, the legacy or the history of this album is so distinct. You know, it's so historic. You know, I want to come off like that. I want to come off like somebody who actually loves this sound just as much as anybody else that actually who have been subscribed to me, and anybody else who comes in to probably want to hear my whatever I have to say. They want to at least hear what are my stories of listening to this album. And well, since again I'm not as old as everyone else. I didn't really grow up in the period when this album was dominating the Billboard charts, but I was at least since in my review for No More Tears, I pretty much already told you that how I got into Ozzy was because of the album No More Tears. That was the first Ozzy album that I had ever heard. Then of course, on the Osbourne Comet compilation album, which again I was listening to around the same time as that one, since it was always playing in the car whenever I was being taken to school and whatnot, or even on field trips, or even again going on to vacation trips and whatnot. That was usually always being played in the car. So that's how I was getting into at least Ozzy and / Black Sabbath. But Diary of a Madman is kind of the second full Ozzy album that I had ever heard. And again, I've always liked the song Over the Mountain. I was always completely mesmerized by the overall the composition of it, just the overall riffs and the overall feel of that song, and the atmosphere. There was something about that song that always I gravitated towards. It was just it had such a majestic feel to it, and I just loved it. and I always kind of wanted to hear the album that it came off of. And that's again, and that ended up coming true when I had. Obviously, it was a kind of a pay of respects to at least a friend of my father's, and I guess you can say my mother's too. And we were going up to at least to. I think I'm not going to say anyone's names or anything, but we went up to at least a cabin to basically pay respects and whatnot. And my dad's late friend, he had a bunch of at least some cool classic rock and metal, particularly at least only one, I guess you can classify one metal album, which is what I'm talking about right now, within those stacks of CDs. Again, Back in Black from AC/DC being one of them, Stormwatch from Jethro Tull, and of course, Diary of a Madman. And when it came to, since we're all the way out in the mountains, whatnot, where this cabin is, I always kind of refer to Gary's cabin, but again, we went all the way up to there, and again, we were able to actually, since he had a big sort of sound system in there, we can play the music as loud as we wanted to up there. And one of the albums that I was asked, I guess in a way, was offered the pick was Diary of a Madman. So I had him basically put this album on, and from there, listening through to it, just even sitting on the balcony part and just having the speakers blasting, I was completely, I loved it. I was basically tossed into the sound. I was thrusted into the overall mesmerizing riffs of each of the songs off of Diary of a Madman. I mean, I have been so familiar with the song Over the Mountain for years that it was always one of those immediately likable songs from the album. But when it came to songs like Flying High Again and Believer, Little Dolls, S.A.T.O., and then of course the title track, it ended up becoming, I had always debated with myself over years, what is my absolute favorite Ozzy Osbourne album? Because, at least of his solo albums, what is my favorite? Because I always went back and forth with what I liked about this album. Or at least what is my definitive favorite Ozzy Osbourne album? And I always kind of went back and forth. Do I like Blizzard of Oz? Do I like No More Tears? Do I like Diary of a Madman? You know, these were really the three albums that always came to mind. Even at times I toss in No Rest for the Wicked. I know you're probably saying, where is, I guess you say, Bark at the Moon, or even The Ultimate Sin fit in these in this conversation. They're not bad albums. I actually definitely will throw in Bark at the Moon as one of my other sort of favorite Ozzy albums, but really my three definitive favorites usually are somewhere between the three albums that I'm presenting you in terms of this conversation. Again, Diary of a Madman, Blizzard of Oz, and No More Tears. But No More Tears and Diary of a Madman were really, I guess you say, counting, also Black Rain from I think maybe the same year, it might have been the following year. I'm trying to remember when I first heard Diary of a Madman, or when we went up to at least the cabin. So I'm trying to remember what year, but I believe it had to at least been still somewhat before Black Rain. But I always loved, I like that album, but I've always loved this one and No More Tears, and these were the only two that I've been familiar for years, at least of any of his really earlier albums, because I didn't get to hear Blizzard of Oz until like 2008. So I didn't get to hear that album at least a few years after I had heard Diary of a Madman. But these had been the two albums I've been familiar with for a long time, but I always kind of went back and forth which one's my favorite. Of course, if you had at least been at least familiar with my channel over times, whenever I do mention Diary of a Madman, I do consider one of my absolute favorite albums from Ozzy. However, again, since I've already recently talked about No More Tears, I've also considered that one of my other favorite albums too from Ozzy, and that's due to the nostalgia of the fact that that was the very first true Ozzy album that I had heard first, at least of his solo material. Like, again, I'm trying to state that as clear as possible of his solo stuff, not counting anything he did with Black Sabbath. But those were at least the two that I've been familiar for years. But I always kind of I always kind of felt at times more gravitated towards Madman, just because of it. It's something about the album just seemed something had it had a more darker feel compared to at least Blizzard. So I mean, there's still some lightweight moments, I guess you can say, more lighter tracks like You Can't Kill Rock and Roll and Tonight. But songs like Over the Mountain, even Flying High Again, kind of even though it's still kind of a more of an upbeat song, not in the way that you expect like Crazy Train, but it still has a very upbeat feel to it. But at the same time, there is a little bit of a dark feel going on to it, at least in terms of the overall riffs and the density of the composition. It still kind of comes off a little bit, but other songs like Believer and Little Dolls and SATO and the title track, and of course, speaking of, again, Over the Mountain, it just comes up dark and heavy. Like, this is actually probably closest to of the first two albums. This kind of feels to be the more heavier of the two. I know some will definitely say, well, Blizzard. Well, Blizzard kind of has a heaviness, but I think the heaviness doesn't come until those last two songs, and maybe save for maybe like, for example, I Don't Know and Suicide Solution. But for the most part, that one kind of has a more of a lightweight, more upbeat feel, and of course some melancholic feel to that album. Whereas Diary just feels more full-blown, more heavier and more metallic sounding, and that's probably also due to the help of really the more refined production job. Even though Max Norman helped produce the previous album, this one, I think this is, you really get the feel of Max Norman's production jobs the best, because of he really made the sound much more massive. It sounds a little more, I guess you say, maybe at times slightly more cleaner sounding, more refined in the production, but it still comes off raw compared to, especially compared to nowadays standards. Still comes off raw, and it's fucking heavy for at least any of his albums. This is probably, for me personally, one of my favorites of these two albums. Even though I grew up listening to these two albums a lot, to both, at least Blizzard and Diary, at least between the first two here at Randy Rhoads on guitar. But this one I always just gravitate towards, especially even when talking about the first two, I always gravitate more towards Diary, because there's just something about this one that this came off much more darker and less, and a little at times a little more threatening in some places too. It just came off more sinister, and it's again, and that's due to the songs like Over the Mountain, Believer, Little Dolls, and SATO and Madman. All these songs just come off more sinister-like in its approach, and that's why I've always really gravitated toward this. And of course, Randy Rhoads' guitar playing on this album is immaculate. He's definitely more flashier at times compared to he was on the previous album, but he still has its own sort of vibrato to him that he comes off a lot more enthusiastic, because you can tell he's having fun just jamming in the studio. Like, that's why he just sounds so lifelike on this album. It's why I think the performance on this album tops the performance on the debut Blizzard of Oz. It tops it. So I've always considered this to be the best of the two albums, and it is probably up there as one of my absolute personal favorite albums. Could be my number one, but at the same time, over the years revisiting No More Tears, that one is kind of in a bit of a predicament in terms of its where I place that album, and just again personally for me, where do I place it nostalgically? But in a way, I still somehow have a way of gravitating more towards Diary. I don't know. It seems it's kind of weird. But again, I've lived with these two albums for a long time, So for me, it's kind of difficult, but I guess in a way, I may have to give it, again, the edge to Diary. Everything just sounds a lot more focused on this one. I mean, everything sounded pretty focused, too, on No More Tears. But everything just sounds, of these two albums, or even any of his more 80s albums, Diary just comes off probably one of the more focused albums from Ozzy. So that's why I've always tend to really give the album at least the edge, more of the edge to Diary of a Madman. So that's pretty much where I am in terms of my actual personal thoughts and my overall relationship. But I just love everything about this. The title track is probably also one of the more, definitely him really putting more proggier sort of arrangements. Because, I mean, Ozzy always kind of flirted prog stuff when it was at Black Sabbath. I mean, for example, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, Sabotage, Technical Ecstasy, and Never Say Die all had their kind of proggy sort of arrangements on those ones. So in this one, I think he kind of revisited a little bit, but he did it in a way that was different, and that's due to the help of at least guys like Randy Rhoads and Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake. So these three guys really kind of help bring those visions to life. They bring Ozzy's visions and everything his to here. But again, speaking of, Ozzy wasn't the only sort of mastermind behind this one. Since I already spoke quite a here and there now about Randy Rhoads and how and his contributions to at least the overall, the compositions and the arrangements of this one, Bob Daisley still deserves a lot of credit for this one. Same goes for at least Lee Kerslake, who sounds phenomenal on this one. This is definitely one of Lee Kerslake's most primal performances. Maybe since at least his stuff with Uriah Heep. He sounds fantastic on this one. He's in top form here, and everyone just sounds like they are in fucking top shape. This is easily why I've always kind of considered this one of the better of the two. It's just that everyone just sounds great on this one. They came into the studio with one purpose and goal, and that's basically just fucking play your asses off. Take these songs, but make it at least sound just make it sound powerful and make it sound just if your life depended on it. And that's how I feel this album comes off of in terms of just the overall performance on this album. It just comes up like if their life depended on it, so it's all great. And again, the atmosphere from at least a keyboard, at least from a keyboard playing standpoint, there's also sort of great sort of synth effects on this one that gives each of these songs more character and everything to them. And that's again, the keyboard playing is actually all being performed by Johnny Cook, who actually performs a lot of the keyboard synths on this album. Don Airey gets credit for the album, and we'll get to folks who get credit on this one, even though you'll know which names I'm referring to. But that all comes in when I'm talking about a lot of the reissues and the overall everything after this album. But a guy named Johnny Cook is one who performs a lot of the keyboards on this one. Don Airey gets credited, but he never performed this one because I think he was off to already being in so-and-so. Whether I think for one, he was off doing with either like Rainbow or whatnot. He was off to work on with still everyone else, being assigned to as being session musicians and whatnot to a lot of the other artists afterwards. And I've already kind of covered all that anyways in this year anyways for some of my Album of the Week episodes that Don Airey gets brought up on. So he gets credit for this, but he didn't really perform on this one. Again, Don Airey performed the keyboards on the previous album, again, Blizzard of Oz, but he didn't get to perform on this one. So Johnny Cook is the guy who's actually the one performing a lot of the keyboards. And you can tell, I mean, if you listen to at least synth stuff, or at least his performances on Don Airey's performances on Blizzard of Oz and some of the ones he did for like either Michael Schenker Group or Rainbow or any of those, or even the stuff he's been doing with Deep Purple, You can tell he's got a different style than what is being played on this one. This does not fit any of his work. You can tell it's someone different playing these synths and whatnot. And that's why it makes more sense that it wasn't Don Airey. But again, to this guy named Johnny Cook, who actually, again, he provides some really cool synth effects to these songs that gives these a whole other sort of worldly feel to them. And it just makes the songs extra cooler. So, all credit goes to Johnny Cook. Finally, that's pretty much what I'm kind of ending here, because again, I can talk all day or throughout this whole entire video about how much I really like Diver Madman. I mean, everything about it. I just, the hooks are fucking great on here, because again, each song is so catchy as one another. Again, it's all again with songs like Over the Mountain, Flying High. Again, Believer is probably the closest I think Ozzy has gotten to really kind of capturing the sort of just the broodingness and the intensity of at least his stuff with Black Sabbath. It kind of has that feel going on. It's great. But again, due to at least Randy Rhoads' more classical, very refined guitar playing, it makes it all them and not really sound like Ozzy is trying to recapture the glory days of Black Sabbath. But it still kind of has that sort of dark eeriness of at least a classic Black Sabbath track. More so, I guess, something off of like Sabotage or even Volume 4 or some of those, you know, not really something like off like Master of Reality or Paranoid or Technical Ecstasy for that matter, you know, or even any of the more recent, or even like 13. But it just comes off more, it still has a very dark feel, like again, of at least a Black Sabbath style track in a way, but it's great. Little Dolls I also love. I've always loved the song. It's been one of my personal favorites about off this album. Again, that's due to the fact that it's the riff and everything is infectious. It's got a hook to it. It's great. SATO is an interesting one. Again, it's more of the almost kind of galloping style rockers on this one. It's fantastic. It's probably the more closest to anything off of Blizzard of Oz, but it's got it's just has another cool sort of atmosphere to it. It's just got a really cool vibe to it. The interesting part about this one is that Bob Daisley is the one who came up with the title for this one, and many people for years it was always kind of a question on what it's about, what is the title, what does the title stand for, SATO. Many people have always kind of felt it means maybe sail across the ocean, but that's a little bit too, I guess it's a little too stock for at least a title. It just seems too easy to think. But the thing is, because of originally it was being titled Strange Voyage, but eventually Bob Daisley changed that title and changed it to this. Sharon, Adrian, Thelma, and Ozzy. Adrian was Sharon's boyfriend at the time, and Thelma was Ozzy's wife at the time as well. So it's definitely interesting and definitely still always worth a mention on here. So there we go. So that's pretty much it where I am with at least talking the most about Diver Madman. It's definitely one of my absolute favorite albums from Ozzy. So this, of course, would end up being the final album for both drummer Lee Kerslake and Randy Rhoads. I'll get to, of course, to the situation surrounding Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake. But for Randy, this was his overall final album and literally his final recording, because after this, we all know about the fatal plane crash that killed Randy Rhoads. And it was one of those unexpected losses at the time, because of nobody really was expecting for a guy like Randy Rhoads to die this early in his career, because he was already beginning to the overall career for Randy Rhoads was starting to really pick up itself by this album. This album was already proving to be a grand slam album for at least Ozzy. I mean, we can look at the Billboard charts for at least its charting. At least in 1981, because in the US, on the UK actually, the UK album charts, it peaked at number 14, and on the US Billboard 200, it peaked at number 16. And then a year later, apparently in 1982, on the RPM 100 album charts, it peaked at number 17. This was pretty much one of his really highest charting albums, and it was already showing a lot of great momentum for both Ozzy, for his solo career, and for Randy Rhoads, who had, prior to at least joining Ozzy, was of course the guitar player for Quiet Riot and recorded 2 albums for them. But those are the only 2 albums that Randy Rhoads had recorded before, again, joining Ozzy and becoming and close to being a megastar. This sound was going to prove, I think, just that. It was going to make Randy into a fucking superstar. But because of the plane crash, it seems to be that his death has made him even more immortalized. It's like they immortalized him in Afterlife, basically. It's while it's always great to kind of at least to actually give at least respect and really kind of keep up the show admiration and respect, and to at least to somebody who really does deserve credit and everything, who does deserve it. But I feel like this for Randy Rhoads is a little bit too. It all seems to come off a little too obsessive. Like it's like all of these records, especially with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame already having inducted Randy Rhoads into its Hall of Fame, is that it comes off to the point where they're doing as a way to maybe make some money and more cash off of the death of Randy Rhoads. The only biggest stuff he's ever recorded was with Ozzy. That's about it. The guys we're never going to see any more credit for this album are going to be, of course, the late Lee Kerslake and Bob Daisley. Again, sadly, Lee Kerslake passed away just a year ago or so, and he's never going to see any still, even in Afterlife, he's never going to see credit for this album. And Bob Daisley, who knows if you'll ever see any more credit for this album, because unknowingly received their walking paper, because again, the story's been told how they left for vacation, they come back, and they basically see these 2 guys, being of course Tommy Aldridge and Rudy Sarzo. Again, Rudy Sarzo was originally with Randy Rhoads and Quiet Riot, so They see both Rudy Sarzo and Tommy Aldridge, and that's when they've pretty much figured out that they were no longer in the band. So they didn't confront him or anything, I guess. They just took their bags and they left. And that was the last time, at least for a while there, especially for Bob Daisley. Because again, Bob Daisley would bury whatever hatchet they got with either Sharon or Ozzy, and would be back in the band by 1983. So, but Lee Kerslake didn't get to. I think he was back to playing with like Uriah Heep or whatnot. He was already doing with other bands. But again, over the years, they never received any sort of credit for this album, because when the album did get released on November 7th in 1981, the credits for both the bass and drums were credited to Tommy Aldridge and Rudy Sarzo. And that really left a stink on both Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake. They basically felt they got slapped in the face, because prior to that, they were at least from recording this album, they weren't receiving any sort of pay or anything for at least during the albums, or just the album after Blizzard of Oz, or any of the tours or whatnot. They weren't receiving the money that they were supposed to have been given, because up to this point, the manager for again Ozzy Osbourne was her brother David. And they always said prior to the sound that every one of the members, apparently even there's been reports from at least Lee Kerslake, who had stated that Randy felt more happy around manager David than around Sharon, even though there has been those weird theories on if there was more than one, but maybe that might account to maybe why Randy felt kind of a little weird around Sharon as the manager. So there's probably something there, since again Sharon had pretty much a thing for both Ozzy and Randy. So there might be again something to those theories. But still, everyone said it was great when David was the manager, but at the same time he didn't want to handle a lot of the responsibility of the money or whatnot, or of just basically managing them. So that's why Sharon took over, and that's where a lot of the issues in the beginning, and they weren't seeing money or anything. So when they found out that, or they saw that both Tommy and Rudy were rehearsing with them, that's when they figured that the reason they weren't getting paid is because of they were beginning to just toss them. So Lee Kersick since then never received any sort of royalty checks for at least Diver Madman, nor even did Bob Daisley. Even to this day, Bob Daisley probably still doesn't receive much royalties for the sound, because of still the subsequent reissues, Tommy Aldridge and Rudy Sarzo still get the credit for playing on this album, but for at least being players on here. But as far as writers, Bob Daisley does get at least credit, but who knows if he still receives royalty for it. So that's why and at least maybe the late 90s or so, Bob Daisley and Lee Kersick sued Ozzy and Sharon for, I think Sharon too. I think they sued them for the fact of not receiving royalties for the album, and they won that case. And so that's why in 2002, when it came to reissuing Ozzy's albums, Sharon apparently had the idea, and she didn't want to take credit for it. Now, apparently because of how much backlash it created on basically removing Lee Kersick's and Bob Daisley's parts from the album and replacing them with newly recorded parts from both Rob DeHulu, again now of Metallica, and Mike Bordin, who again re-recorded these parts for the 2002 reissues of Diver Madman and Blizzard of Oz, and it just caused a lot of stink, not just with Daisley and Kersick, but with the entire fan base, who felt like that they got insulted. It was bad, basically, and it resulted in a very, very wonky sounding albums. Basically, it didn't make them sound better. The remixing, I mean, there's no problem with remixing albums, but at the same time, when you're remixing them and are replacing them with re-recorded parts, that is usually because you're basically tampering with an already you're tampering with an original piece. Basically, you're tampering with art. Don't tamper with art. You're just causing more problems with that, and it almost seems like you're creating a forgery of that art. And that's what they did, what Sharon did with the two reissues of Diver Madman and Blizzard of Oz in 2002, was she created a forgery of those first two albums. That was one of the biggest fucking mistakes, and it just proved how greedy Sharon became over time, and she was already showing her colors back then from all the counts of the guitar players that had replaced Randy Rhoads, or at least to fill out those positions, just to finish the tour off for Diver Madman. So it just created more issues, and over time, many people tried to put blame on Ozzy for it. However, Ozzy has stated over years, even in one of his books, actually it was 2009 autobiography, that he had no clue that Sharon was going to pull that. He didn't know that was going to take place. Sharon stated that it was her way, basically, of, I guess she wanted to commit damage control, even though it created more damage. But she tried to say that it wasn't so much to piss off, basically, Lee Kerslake and Bob Daisley, but it's more so as a way to maybe see as a new way of revisioning those two albums. Bunch of slippery fucking horse shit, because of what it really was, again, was the Sharon wanted to get out as much of paying royalties to those two guys who deserved it. And again, and of course, who knows how much Rudy Sarzo and Tommy Aldridge felt, even though Tommy Aldridge has been on record stating that every time people ask him about recording on Diver Madman, he's always decided to take the time to actually give the credit to Lee Kerslake, because he actually is in. He went and said that all the credit should go to Lee Kerslake, because he says, like, well, that's not my drumming on that album. That's Lee Kerslake. So he always tries to put Lee Kerslake over, which was probably the most smartest thing. I think Tommy Aldridge and Rudy Sarzo knew what they were getting into when their names were going to be credited on the release of Diver Madman. They figured that it was, again, it felt like lying to the public instead of actually being truthful. It was wrong, and it was like they were getting a raw deal out of it. But in 2011, when it came to at least the legacy editions for both Blizzard and Diary, they decided that it would be time to finally reissue them again. Since 1994-95, the original mixes of Blizzard and Diary, with Bob Daisley's and Lee Kerslake's parts all being restored back. That definitely brought up some questions on if this would be the time that if this would then finally Lee Kerslake and Bob Daisley are going to receive royalties for it. Bob Daisley, I think, still saw some royalties for Blizzard. However, it seemed like for Diary, Tommy Aldridge and Rudy Sarzo are still being the ones credited on the reissue for Diver Madman for the Legacy Edition. They are still the two that are still gaining credits for it, whereas Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake are barely getting any credit for it, and that meant, once again, Sharon not giving royalties to Lee Kerslake and Bob Daisley. So once again, Sharon did everything she could to still get out of paying them, even though they had won the court case. So it just comes off as more Sharon's bitter power trip. So there we go. Again, if you have any sort of nostalgic memories, just like me, about this sound, especially you've got even more nostalgic memories that go farther than my nostalgic memories, you can leave them in the comment section below. Again, whether it be positive or negative, you can leave them. So with that, if you have never heard Diver Madman, though, you've been living under a rock. It is a classic album in its own right, and it should be. It's already been getting another sort of digital, this time, again, digital, 40th anniversary edition. So if you like to listen to your stuff digitally, go and check it out. There you go. Hope all of you enjoyed. If this is Every Thrash and Sing, I'm out. And I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.